The problems facing New Zealand's primary sector have been mounting at a rapid pace. So I think it's time for open hearts and open minds. Nā mai, haere mai, and welcome to another episode of Serious Country for your Wednesday. Now, I do have to let you know that this show has been pre-recorded as well, and we will be back live on Monday evening. However, stick around and watch live, but I will not be able to take your comments or your questions for our guests, unfortunately. Myself and Joel, producer Joel, we are hitting the road to do some filming on farms throughout Otago and South Canterbury as well. So really looking forward to it. I started out my career in rural broadcasting out on farms around this beautiful country, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And of course, I feel like it really is serious country. This program is how I see and live the world, and it is through my lens that I bring you the guests that I have heard of these amazing stories through farmersweekly.co.nz, and we highlight the incredible intelligence that is within our own country and the opportunities that are abundant. I mean, yes, we do focus on the matters that matter most, so farming, food and fashion here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. However, the science and the innovation is absolutely outstanding. We can't, of course, turn our eye to the realities of what is happening around the globe. And I read from one of our major banks, they're banking on an 80 cents US dollar in terms of our exchange rate. Tipping it to nearly an all-time high. So therefore, yes, we do appreciate the environment that we are farming and selling our food and fashion into the world. However, the advancements in technology and science and biotech is absolutely outstanding. So I do have some great guests for you on the show tonight. However, Joel, I do want to bring to your attention a particular story I thought may have interested you. I was talking to family members. I had our family Christmas barbecue on Sunday, and you know, it's testing time, these Christmas functions. You've got kids and right through to the aunties, and all ranging in age, trying to get their dinner on together, and I mean, it is a stressful time. However, we have to be so grateful that we can actually all come together in such a big group of about 20 of us, especially with COVID going down. And my auntie was telling me about my cousin who has been in lockdown for 6 months in Canada, and it's going into winter, and his work has told him he must take 3 weeks off. And so he's like, now I'm locked inside in winter and I now don't have my work to do. So, I really feel for the relationships that could have lasted so long, but lockdown absolutely killed them. Or did it strengthen them? There's been a lot of lockdown love stories as well. But Joel, I need to talk to you about the story. I know you wouldn't have seen this, but I can imagine it might be something that you would do. Maybe I could be wrong. Okay, so it's titled, Man Goes on 400-kilometre Walk After Argument with Wife in Lockdown.
Okay.
And he was fined for breaching lockdown rules. The 48-year-old Italian man went on a hike claiming that he needed to calm down after falling out with his partner, and he averaged 65 kilometres each day. He ended up walking the entirety of the country.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, in Italy. This is in Italy. And when he was found, he said, I'm fine, I'm just a little tired. He was fined about equivalent of 700 New Zealand dollars, and he was, best bit, suggested that maybe he should go to some marriage counselling and please don't do it again.
I mean, that's some good Forrest Gump stuff right there.
Isn't it? But I mean, I know that you have a loving relationship and I shouldn't suggest that fact, but it's a typical fantastic thing that a man would think to do, right? And when a man needs to calm down and he wants to go for a walk, then potentially we should just let him. So extremely frustrating. Joel, turning our attention to the the Christmas that Ireland will have with these different relations. Can I see you? I can't see you.
Oh, you want to? Oh, hello.
I do.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. You're not wearing a very wintry shirt for how it is in Ireland and a white Christmas, but are things looking good for your family to come together?
I don't know about coming together, to be honest. I think everyone's going to be doing Christmas in their own places. But they've kind of met up before they went into lockdown again, and then they'll probably meet up after lockdown. But I don't know what Christmas Day is going to look like this year. It could be quite different.
So you won't be the only one zooming into your Christmas from New Zealand.
No, exactly.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, I heard that Ireland have made a very special announcement in their parliament, making an exemption for Santa as being exempt from quarantine.
Oh, yeah, no, Santa is exempt. He can come in and out of the country, which is good to know. And it was very important for the, I can't remember, the Minister of something to make that clear to the children of Ireland.
We're bringing you there's some absolutely pearlers of stories, but we do have 4 wonderful guests for you on this edition of Sarah's Country. That, of course, as I said, about the matters that matter most on farming, food and fashion here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But we do like to bring a bit of light to the fact that the rest of the world are certainly not in the most advantageous position that New Zealand is in. And here in New Zealand, we absolutely acknowledge that. I went to a concert with over 1,500 people in a theatre on Saturday night, and you couldn't escape the feeling of how poignant it is that we were so grateful for that fact. So anyway, if you are listening and tuning into Sarah's Country, our thoughts are with you. If you are not here in our absolute paradise, and we want to continue to bring you the latest stories of what is happening in the developments on farming and growing here in New Zealand. So after 7:20, we have a thing called climate change, which is still very much on the table amidst COVID. Policymakers here in New Zealand are being encouraged by greenhouse gas guru and professor Dr Frank Mitloehner, who joins us from the University of Canterbury. They are being encouraged to be more supportive of New Zealand farmers in this mission. And Dr. Frank joins us after a webinar that he did with the New Zealand Sustainable Roundtable of Beef. Then after 7:30, New Zealand cattle prices lifted through August and September due to more limited cattle supplies. But 2021 has a lot of strong headwinds. Blake Holgate, sustainability analyst for Rabobank, will explain following the latest report on the beef consumption patterns globally in our markets and how that will have effect. To close the show, conditional ban on live cattle exports has lifted here in New Zealand, but until the wider review is finalised, exporters must continue to meet all existing requirements. Brent Wallace is a livestock exporter and will join the show with his opinion on how this is good for the industry. But firstly, I've been looking forward to having this gentleman on the show. And of course, I get to hear about these wonderful things. But of course, they're not all ready for public displays of affection. I think you will have a public display of affection for this particular innovation, which is being worked on here at AgResearch in Canterbury in conjunction with the team at Animation Research in Dunedin. And that's they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, bringing into reality farmers being able to visualize what their farm may look like into the future, utilizing scientific data and to illustrate what different land use options may be available. There's so many applications. And with our next guest, Dr Seth Laurenson, the senior scientist for AgResearch, I want you to visualize how you believe they could use this new tool in an application in some form of how you are involved in this sector. That is my challenge to you. Seth joins us up next here on Sarah's Country.
This is Sarah's Country.
welcome. If you've just tuned into Serious Country, this has been pre-recorded on a very hot afternoon here in Canterbury. But we are away on the road, myself and producer Joel Rock, doing some filming for a client, and of course a great opportunity to get around the country and out of the studio. So I'm so sorry if you are putting in your comments. I will not be able to get to them, as I will not be physically here live reading and going through the wonderful guests that we have on the show, as always, in conjunction with the great team at Farmers Weekly. I've been looking for an opportunity to talk to our next guest since I emceed a panel at the Canterbury show now a couple of years ago, and I was in awe of the progress that he had made with his extended team. AgResearch has developed this tool. It's called a hyperfarm that uses digital stimulation to help farmers and growers visualize changes in use to their land and how those changes can impact on things like environment and profitability. Imagine being able to trial out an idea in virtual format before you wash money down the toilet. Of course, following regulatory changes requiring farmers to reassess land uses on parts of their farm, this mapping tool has been developed to look at those options. It's absolutely fabulous, and Dr Seth Laurenson from AgResearch joins us now on the program. Seth, I know that this has been in development with the team at Animation Research, Ian Taylor's outfit in Dunedin, for some time. Can you take our listeners and viewers back to when you first had that idea?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I guess we sort of saw a bit of a need for these types of things probably back a couple of years ago. When the water quality limit settings was in play in Canterbury, and there's sort of a need for communities essentially and farmers and everyone sort of to do with those communities to make decisions about what they wanted in life. And we sort of thought that a lot of those discussions were while being extremely important, were pretty complex for a lot of the people that were involved in trying to make those decisions. So we sort of thought, well, look, we can use technology, we can use visualization, we can use types of sort of gaming, and also put a bit of our smarts around the science that we do all together to make Hyperfarm, really.
And so therefore you've got, I can just imagine that, some science-minded people that really deeply understand agriculture. And I know from working in the same building as the animation research team who are far from understanding how the framework of agriculture is so interdependent on so many things. They're used to building the graphics of the America's Cup and cricket, etc. The conversations would have been very interesting on the outcomes you were trying to achieve from a development perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, they were. They still are. They, I remember, early on, I didn't even know what an API is, and now those sort of words seem to roll off my tongue a lot. But I think that's the beauty of it, is when you can get those sort of two worlds together to say, actually, it's not all about doing science in the lab. It's about the way that science is conveyed, but also the way people are able to interact with it, really, and to sort of turn it into something valuable. And I wouldn't even say it's been tough. It's been really exciting, and it's been a really rewarding 2 years that we've been at this project, and we're hoping to get something out to end users very soon.
So what is an example whereby you've got a hill country farmer here in Canterbury with a combination of topography from steep to flat, a combination of different challenges and opportunities in different areas? How would they start to utilise this that was some tangible outcomes and visualise that for regulatory purposes, but also too from a profitability perspective as well?
Yeah, so I guess put simply, what we're trying to do is give that farmer some options, and that might be, well, I know paddock 54 is a trouble paddock for me, and that's an issue that I need to resolve to meet a requirement with the council, or it might be actually, I'm not sure whether this area of my farm is best in this particular land use. I might like to consider a different land use. And importantly, I don't think we're trying to make the decision for the farmer. We're trying to just fuel the conversation around it. So we're just trying to put the science and the ease into the discussion, so they can sit at the kitchen table and say, well, actually, would we consider growing blueberries, or how does growing apples stack up against the pine trees that we currently have? And it's really just to fuel those discussions and for that group of people to better sort of see where they see their future.
In terms of agri-tech, the word interoperability is one often discussed, and for this to be successful, everyone needs to be plugging in as much information as possible so that those models are as accurate as they can be. What sort of success are you having in those conversations with all of the stakeholders?
I think we're starting to have those discussions now, really. I think what we've focused on is saying, all right, well, let's put something else on the table so people know what we're talking about. That looks attractive to people to say, well, actually, I want to be a part of that, and I want to make my information available for the people at the end of the pipe to be able to use that. I think it's quite a neat discussion for particularly CRIs that this form of micropayment, let's charge people $1.50 or 80 cents as opposed to large sums of money because they're using it quite regularly. I think these types of models are really good for us as a way to get our science out to the public, but also, the reality is we do need to be paid for it because we've got, realities in life that mean that we need to be paid. But I think what we're trying to do is to change the discussion around we need to be paid and more around how do we actually create valuable impact for these land use decision making.
Yeah, I mean, it's super exciting. So, I mean, what type of economic scale does Hyperfarm need to get to for it to be cost effective for a farm to get modelled and be in the system to then be able to start using it? Is it very much still at a beta stage and a very costly exercise for only the super keen, or will it get down in price?
No, so it is. That's a really good question, and that's something that we focused a lot on this third generation tool that we're now building closely with Ngāi and we're aiming to roll that out to 12 iwi around the country in conjunction with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise in July. And we've done quite a lot of work to reduce the computing power that's required to run Hyperfarm by asking farmers, what level of information is required for the particular decisions that we're hoping to support. And so there's been a lot of work around the user interface, a lot of work around, making it really simple and friendly to use, but not compromising that science. I think what we would hope that this would come. It wouldn't be an expensive tool, and we would look to partner where we could.
I mean, I can see it getting to a point that every farm has a certificate of title on a flat 2D perspective, that every piece of land in New Zealand gets it to a point of a 3D that can be made available as a point of difference when you go to sell your property. Because imagine that ability to do due diligence on different models of land use when you're looking at buying a property. I'm just giving a hint here over to some of our real estate companies to get behind this, because that is where there is becoming a real blockage, let alone ECAN being able to have a look of what's going on as well. So is that the goal, to get it to a point that it's a digital footprint of our land here in New Zealand?
I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. I think, if I'm out to buy a piece of land and I want to grow, for instance, hops, I can scan through areas where there's land available and to assess whether, that is a suitable place for hops, assess some of the logistics around how do I get my hops to somewhere where they're going to be dried, and to really start going that next level of decision making towards buying that property. And I think where we've positioned ourselves is not in recreating tools, but it's really trying to provide that umbrella across existing tools and to try and make the existing tools communicate, for instance, on the same spatial scale with each other. So we're not out to recreate a nitrogen model or anything like that. We're just trying to put the nitrogen model information with other information, or say about biodiversity or sediment loss or job creation.
It's literally like you're creating the CAD program and letting all the architects within New Zealand's agricultural sector plug in and play and lay out on that house plan, or interior designers placing furniture within a house as another example to see that. And when it comes to also catchment groups celebrating, the water quality improvement, will it be able to be expanded beyond that into a community where you can put your farm up into the catchment and say, well, look, here is the visual data of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where we want to head. We've done a little bit of work since, in the last 6 months to change the way Hyperfarm's working to allow that scaling up and scaling down. So we can say, okay, well, you, Sarah, have your farm, but it's so much more powerful when I can bring my map of my farm together, and we can start thinking about what we can do together and what we can do at a larger scale. So we will hopefully be able to do that in the near future.
I'm a bit worried about telling everyone about the work you're doing, Seth, because I want every single person listening to get in touch with Seth if they've got a way to plug in, because this is seriously what we need. This is a dashboard that's been created with, no major competitive play here. This is for the benefit of the industry. Of course, there'll be a commercial model, as Seth said, but this will be as good as the data going in to what we can achieve out. And if we don't measure it, we can't manage it, right?
That's right. Yeah, no, that's right. And it's also sort of trying to democratize that information to the people and putting it where it's needed, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Seth, is it okay if anyone gets in touch with you, Seth Laurenson from AgResearchers? I want to see your phone run hot. But this is really exciting. So 2021, what does that look like in the development phase going into, as you said, the third version?
Yep. So what we've done now is we work at quite a high pace. We've now designed the third version, which is off to be built now. That'll be out in June, and we're going to roll that out, sort of a soft rollout to about 12 to 15 end users to sort of gain some feedback. But essentially, we are on a track to get this out to users, and that's a really big thing for our team. We want our science to be used and be valued by the people who require it, really. And we don't want information to be sitting on our computers for longer than what it needs to be, really.
Oh, it's so fantastic. You can check out the article about the digital tool gazes into the farm's future on farmersweekly.co.nz. Thank you so much, Seth Laurenson there from AgResearch, joining us on Serious Country, a pre-recorded show. I do need to let you know we are out and about around the country in the countdown to Christmas. We will be back live on Monday for our last week of the year. And of course, in the meantime, you can go to farmersweekly.co.nz for more information, and also check out Hyperfarm on AgResearchers' website for more information. After the break, are New Zealand farmers part of the solution when it comes to climate change? Greenhouse gas guru Dr Frank Mitloehner joins us following his recent webinar he did with the New Zealand Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. I thoroughly enjoyed this interview, as I know you will. Up here next on Sarah's Country.
This is Sarah's Country.
There's a recent webinar with the New Zealand Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, where we learned that when it comes to climate change, policymakers need to be more supportive of New Zealand farmers. Dr Frank Mitloehner, a professor of air quality specialising at the Cooperative Extension for the Department of Animal Science at the University of California, presented at this webinar, and he joins us now. Thank you so much, Dr Frank, for taking the time to join us here in Sarah's Country. Some very encouraging words to New Zealand farmers, telling the policymakers here to sit up and pay more attention, because farmers going out of business does not help the climate change matter, does it?
No, it certainly doesn't. And I think that the farming sector is one to pay particular attention to, because farmers can be a very important part of the solution of a changing climate.
And so therefore, when it comes to being incentivized to do a good job, what were some of your suggestions that you outlined?
Look, our legislature here in California came up with a goal of reducing methane by 40%, 40% to be achieved by the year 2030. And at first, everybody was up in arms about that, thinking this could never be done. But the legislature did something quite smart. They used, instead of the normal stick approach of using rules, regulations, and fines, they decided to go the incentive approach, the carrot approach. And they dispersed $500 million to partner with the livestock sector in buying and purchasing technologies that can reduce methane. And it started a few years ago. Our farmers already have done so, meaning reduced methane by 25%. So we already have of where we want to be with our 40% goal, and that has been achieved by working in partnership.
When it comes to the science, and I think a lot of the arguments and debates I'm hearing here in New Zealand is around what particular calculation and method is being used. When it comes to the scenario you're talking about, what modelling and science are you working from?
So one of the biggest challenges is that up until now, many governments in the world treat methane as if it were to behave just like CO2, like a so-called long-lived climate pollutant. But that's not correct, because methane, in contrast to CO2, is not just produced, but methane is also naturally destroyed. And the fact that it's destroyed, this process called oxidation, is not taken into consideration. But it must be if you want to do correct accounting. Because then you would find that the amount of methane produced and the amount of methane naturally destroyed are roughly in balance. A constant herd of cattle, for example, will not add to additional, and that's important, additional methane and hence additional warming. If you manage to reduce methane, then you can actually induce negative warming, which is a fancy word for cooling, and that's really what we want. Now, methane is a challenge overall. It is a potent greenhouse gas, but you know what? You can turn it into an opportunity, because if you incentivize its reduction, then it can help cool our planet. So livestock can contribute to actively pulling carbon out of the air. And if now some of your viewers or listeners think that I have lost my marbles, the same is true for governments incentivizing the planting of trees on farms. Why would these governments do that? They do that because trees suck carbon out of the atmosphere during photosynthesis. And that reduces warming. So the same thing is true when you reduce methane. You're actively pulling carbon out of the air, and that's what we should incentivize.
It's certainly a hard ask when it's a great story to tell about reducing animal agriculture, the words that are repeated by climate change protesters, particularly in the States, and to be able to get the level of detail and understanding of that, and that what you're suggesting is not simply creative accounting, must be a hard sell.
It is not creative accounting at all. It is looking at the biogeochemical processes and then using what's possible to our greatest advantage. And that, with that, I don't mean the farmers, but I mean society's advantage. We can actually use agriculture and forestry, which are the only two sectors of society that don't just produce, but also destroy greenhouse gases, and further incentivize the latter, namely the destruction of methane by, for example, using feed additives in cattle, or by using certain manure management strategies that help us reduce methane. It's absolutely possible. Let's use our farmers as partners and have them help us to counteract some of the fossil fuel emissions that we really need to get under control. By ramping up methane destruction, we can do that.
What are some of those things that are tangibly progressing well with science in feed additives and manure management, as you mentioned, that we can share with our viewers and listeners that they can start to get their head around implementing?
So here in California, we started out policy-wise by incentivizing manure methane reductions, the generations of so-called anaerobic digesters, the covering of the lagoons where the manure is stored is incentivized, and that prevents these gases from going into the atmosphere. So we are now trapping them under tar, and then we're taking these gases, referred to as biogas, and we convert the biogas into what's called RNG, renewable natural gas. And this RNG is a fuel type. So you trap the biogas on, let's say, a dairy, so that gas is now not going to the air, it's trapped, and convert it into vehicle fuel. So we are now taking biogas from dairies, we are converting it into vehicle fuel, putting it into semi-trucks, and now we no longer have to burn diesel with these trucks, we are burning the biogas-derived RNG. And that is the most carbon negative fuel type there is. And when I say carbon negative, I mean overall you're reducing carbon by doing so. And this is incentivized like nothing else out here. California is incentivizing this conversion of biogas into RNG dramatically with so-called low carbon fuel standard credits. There are some dairies that make more money by selling these credits than they would by selling their milk.
Wow.
And then on the other hand, you have research, such as the ones we do here at UC Davis, into feed additives. And we are finding that the so-called enteric emissions, meaning the methane that's belched out by animals, by cattle, let's say, can be reduced by anywhere between 10 to 40%. And some of those technologies involve new molecules like the so-called 3-NOP. Others are essential oils or seaweed. There's a whole list of additives. It's not a very long list, but it's a list, I would say, of 5 ingredients that I have worked with and my colleagues here at UC Davis that we have found to be very effective. So they reduce methane. The question now is, who's paying for it? Who is paying for that reduction? Is the public willing to take up some of that or not?
Yeah, and that is my question around that is for policymakers, as you are calling to utilise farmers as a partner in this climate change mission. Policymakers, it's very easy to just have a blanket ETS which goes on stock units, numbers of livestock run on a property, regardless of the management and the genetics of those animals.
Well, in my opinion, that really makes no sense. So, for example, here in the United States, we used to have 25 million dairy cows in the entire country, 25. Today, that was back in 1950. Today, we only have 9 million. So we went from 25 million dairy cows to now 9 million. But with this much smaller herd today, we have increased milk production by 60%. So we went from 25 million to 9 million dairy cows, but with this much smaller herd, we are producing 60% more milk. That means the carbon footprint of a liter of milk has decreased by two-thirds. So it's very clear, it's not about cow numbers, cattle numbers. It's about efficiencies. And people have a hard time understanding efficiencies when it comes to livestock. They understand it much better when it comes to fuel efficiency of their car. If I tell someone your fuel efficiency, the efficiency of your car is much better today than the one that your parents' car had or your grandparents' car. All three were able to drive 100 kilometers, but your parents' or grandparents' car needed way more gas for that. And way more gas needed means way more emissions blown into the air. The same is true for livestock. Our livestock today is drastically more efficient than it used to be. The efficiency of emissions or the efficiency of production in New Zealand is much, much higher than that in many other countries of the world. If you were to drive your farmers out of New Zealand, that slack would be picked up by other countries in the world that have much less efficiency and therefore higher emissions. And this is a process called leakage, meaning you're losing hundreds or so farmers, and the production they normally would have put out will be picked up by other people who are less efficient and greater emitters. And that overall doesn't do anything to our climate other than making it worse. Because guess what? A greenhouse gas molecule of methane or so does not care where it's emitted. It cares that it's emitted. So let's produce these kind of things like meat and milk and eggs and so forth in the places of the world where we do it best.
Oh, Dr. Frank Mitloehner from the University of California in the Department of Animal Science, the professor in equality, joining us following the New Zealand Roundtable Sustainable Beef webinar, which you can check out the hour-long webinar at newzealandsustainablebeef.co.nz and search Rethinking Methane. But of course, it's also covered in a Farmers Weekly article you can get online, Farmers Need Incentive, GHG Experts says, brought thanks to Annette Scott's article in last week's Farmers Weekly. Absolutely fascinating stuff, and I really hope that Dr. Frank is sitting down with our Climate Change Minister James Shaw to make sure that he understands the practical sense around that. Absolutely fantastic. Now, up next on the show, what sort of impact did the COVID-19 lockdown have on consumer habits? Blake Holgate, a sustainability analyst for Rabobank, will join us following the recent Rabobank's latest beef quality report.
This is Sarah's Country.
Really pleased we got into this. Thanks for your help, Dave.
It's a good idea, honey. You reckon it'll come out? Cover it in talcum powder, leave it 10 minutes, you'll be fine. Good call, Dave.
Good call on getting those security cameras, Dave.
You call a new one yet?
Yeah, kind of.
When you've got decisions to make, we'll be there to help you make the right call.
I'd go for those ones, Bob. Yeah, good call.
Did you choose these?
Oh, you know.
For great advice and insurance, talk to FMG.
Well, welcome to Sarah's Country. If you've just joined us live, we are pre-recorded. I'm sorry, we are out on the road and absolutely love getting on farms. And we're doing a bit of filming for the Trailblazer Irrigation Awards. Really, really looking forward to having a look at some of the most sustainable irrigators in New Zealand. Now, our next guest, following the COVID-19 pandemic and African swine fever, has changed beef consumption patterns through 2020 and will create opportunities for industry participants in the beef supply chain. This is outlined in the latest Rabobank's Beef Quarterly Report, and Blake Holgate, sustainability analyst for Rabo, joins us now. So, COVID lockdown measures throwing people into their homes and forcing them to learn how to cook rather than go out to a restaurant certainly has changed the distribution channels for 2020. How does 2021 look into the future, Blake?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right, Sarah. So when we're looking at beef, for example, beef is traditionally a protein that most consumers in our key markets eat out. So they go to a restaurant, they have it cooked for them, and predominantly that's how they eat a large part of their beef. Obviously, lockdown measures that saw a lot of those restaurants, especially those dine-out restaurants, closed or restricted, meant that sales channel wasn't available. At the same time, our consumers were sitting at home with some of them with spare time on their hand, and a lot of them have experimented and tried cooking beef at home and have really liked it, apparently according to the retail sales, which has shown up beef to be selling really strong through there. As we look into 2020-21, we do expect restrictions on food service to continue to varying degrees in our key markets like the United States and parts of Europe that are currently in some form of lockdown now. So to some extent that will continue into 2021. As those lockdowns come off, yes, we would expect some consumers to revert back to old habits, but we also think there's an opportunity to actually lock in those behaviours longer term. So seeing beef to be seen as something that's more eaten at home than it traditionally has been.
And on the ground here over August and September, cattle prices have lifted, but that's due to a lot of what's going on here in the marketplace. But this concern is that bull prices have fallen to 17 to 19% year on year. It's a real worry in what's happening around beef exports, and then with that extremely high Kiwi dollar, not US dollar, not going anywhere. There's some serious headwinds.
Yeah, I suppose, first of all, for a wee bit of context, that 17 to 19% down on last year is against those record highs we saw at the back end of last year. Right. And that was when African swine fever was really kicking in, and we saw huge demands out of China that was pushing beef prices to really all-time level highs. So even though we are 15 to maybe 20% back, it probably falls in line closer to what we'd consider the 5-year average price. But you're dead right. There are still significant headwinds out there. We are still trading into slowing economies, which we know has an impact on beef consumption. We still know, as I've just alluded to, that sales through that food service channel are compromised, particularly those higher value cuts. And then, as you said, add on top of that a dollar that's a lot stronger than a lot we're predicting 6 months ago. And it does sort of start to add up and does put some downward pressure on beef prices, which is what we've sort of seen over the last month or so.
So advice going forward in terms of trading bulls and store cattle back here in New Zealand, is the short-term game gone out of it?
Oh, look, seasonal factors will still play a big part in that. I mean, I analyse what's happening in the market. I still think there's some positive signs out there on the global export market. We're still seeing demand from China and the US is strong, particularly in the US for that grinding product, which does well to, I suppose you'd say, hold up the floor of beef prices. So going forward at this stage, I still see us operating at a scheduled farm level price, something pretty close to a 5-year average, which has been quite a reasonable price. But in saying that, there are still significant risks weighted to the downside as we talk around the dollar, as we talk around maybe further ongoing lockdown restrictions in key markets, and again that economic impact if that's greater than anticipated. So yeah, at the moment, I think the 6-month outlook still looks solid or reasonable, but your viewers should be well aware there are significant risks that we still need to be keeping an eye on.
And when I do speak to any members from our meat marketers and processors, as well as SURMA from Meat Industry Association, they are patting themselves on the back around how they've pivoted into providing meat for e-commerce. Is this a way for us to elevate off that floor in terms of price, and will it become part of our future, or is it a bit of a wait for food service to return game plan?
Look, I think in terms of that online sales channels, that's something that isn't new. It's been around a while, but it's really has struggled to get traction. Again, COVID has sort of accelerated the uptake or interest on online sales, not just for food, but all kinds of goods. And this is one I do think will stick coming out of COVID. So people will try it, get used to it, and absolutely, I think it's another positive for the industry. I don't think it's a game changer in the short term. I think it plays in really well to the strengths of New Zealand in terms of being able to target the key consumers and key markets that we're wanting to get our product to. So over time, I expect it to be something that we see more of, we target more, we do more of. But again, it's probably not something I'd expect to significantly move the dial schedule pricing wise in the short term.
Thank you so much for your market commentary. As always, Blake Holgate, the sustainability analyst for Rabobank. And of course, these fantastic long-form podcasts on AgResearchers podcast. Blake will go into further details. So if you're in search of another podcast to listen to, I highly recommend downloading the AgResearch podcast. And for a lot of in-depth information, not just on beef, on all types of commodity markets around the globe. Lastly on the show, the live export ban has lifted here in New Zealand, but under close conditions and requirements. Brent Wallace joined us earlier in the year on Serious Country. Following that ban, he's a livestock exporter and will update us on the situation right here next on Serious Country.
This is Serious Country.
Well, thank you so much for watching Serious Country live. And if you've just joined us, this show is pre-recorded, so I do apologise. I cannot take your questions or comments throughout the rest of the show. Now, lastly, on Serious Country, the conditional ban on live cattle exports has been lifted here in New Zealand, but until a wider review is finalised, exporters must continue to meet all existing requirements. The absolute ban on livestock exports was imposed in the 22nd of September this year, while the Ministry for Primary Industries launched an independent review into the animal welfare assurances it receives from exporters following the tragic loss of Gulf Livestock One. Brent Wallace, a livestock exporter, joins us now. Brent, talking about those particular requirements, are they more than what you were traditionally doing?
It's probably it's a little bit different. Most exporters have been using those laws and regulations for a long time. It's just basically, I guess, making it more formal over here. A lot of Australian exporters, that's just standard in Australia, how they operate out of there.
So basically, taking what Australia do well, and they do big numbers of live exports in comparison to New Zealand, to set a bit of a benchmark until that review is finished?
Yeah, look, I mean, what they've brought in so far, it has been good for the industry, but it's still, for me, I think we're still a long way off. This 90% loading, it's good for, like, out of Australia, that's 6 months of the year what they do, and then the rest of the 6 months, it can be sort of up to 70-80% less load, and so we're getting there slowly. Yeah.
And what sort of flow-on effect is that happening to cattle in quarantine here in New Zealand?
Yeah, look, the government's just, and MPI just taking a little bit more, closer looks at certain things, how we load vessels, obviously weights, square meters per animal. They've definitely tightened up on that across the board, which, to be fair, they probably should have been doing that all the way through.
Yeah, so this is a positive. What is coming out of it from your eyes as a livestock exporter, that whatever does come out of it is better than a ban?
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think the way I sort of view it is, because we've had this disaster, we shouldn't be tightening up our rules, regulations just because of a maritime disaster. This this sort of stuff should have been happening years ago. It's just obviously making us a bit more accountable of what we're doing. Obviously what we do is all about animal welfare. It's a disaster doesn't need to be enforcing the rules, really.
Mm-hmm. And what about in terms of industry regulation, and what type of structures could be in place for that going forward that you think?
I think definitely we've still got a more focus on the big picture with stocking densities on boats, and whether it's going out of here and on winter time into a northern hemisphere summer. I think we've got to look at rules of going less than that. Pregnant cattle, I think we've got to have a review through to who we've got trading out of this country as far as exporters go, and who's signing up to get export certificates. To get an export certificate, it is pretty easy. You pay $300 to $500, and then you can sort of go and export animals. But in saying that too, that's only sort of part of the main thing. Is what we say is this AWAC, which is Animal Welfare Export Certificate. That's pretty much if you can get that signed off, ticked off as you're going through, that's the key part to it. But I think we've just got to get stricter on the credibility of exporters. Like, anyone can get a license. I think the government's really got to enforce, and if you've got an operation started, who's credible within that organisation to actually pull this off and do it correctly. So guys with industry knowledge, that's basically what I'm sort of saying there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we heard from you last time here on Sarah's Country, your years and decades of experience in terms of stockmanship on the boats in Australia, and you understand this, and this is where your opinion's coming from. Normally Australia would send 120,000 cattle to New Zealand, and to China, and New Zealand sitting around that 20 to 60,000 mark. But it appears that the demand from China is not going anywhere. So for us to be able to continue this particular industry, what's happening now, you're saying, is just part and parcel of operating globally within all of the competing markets to have market access to China.
That 120,000 out of Australia, that's just breeding stock to China. That's without the slaughter side of things. New Zealand, we're looking at 120 to 130,000 this year alone, and reports I'm getting out of China at the moment, there's forward contracts for next year, which numbers are talking through the roof, and to the point that we simply won't be able to supply that many cattle, and that's sort of just the growing demand from obviously Australia and China having their little bit of a domestic at the moment. And also, we've got to be mindful. You've got countries like Chile sort of on their, coattails, just sort of waiting. Basically, the 6 or 8 week ban we had, that sort of opened the door for cattle to come out of Chile and to China. There's obviously a few issues which popped up pretty quickly over a couple shipments. Now that demand swung back onto New Zealand, obviously the ban's lifted, and it's gone a little bit mad, to be fair.
So therefore, what sort of prices for heifers are we talking?
Friesian heifers at the moment, F12 and better. The prices come out at the moment for $2,000 for a sort of a January, February delivery. Unrecorded stuff, that's sort of getting up to $1,500, $1,800. Whereas, heifers sort of this time last year was right down to sort of $1,300. So the demand's just growing.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us. Brent Wallace, the livestock exporter, and the ban has been lifted on live exports here in New Zealand following the tragedy of Gulf Livestock 1. However, the industry is under review from MPI, and you can read more on the story on farmersweekly.co.nz, and Ned Scott has been following the live exports very, very closely. And of course, Sarah's Country is produced in alliance with a fantastic team at Farmers Weekly. And of course, this is all we've got time for on Sarah's Country. It has been an absolute pleasure to be with you this week. Next week will be our last week before Christmas, and it will also be the last paper before Christmas. So, of course, get in touch, Sarah at sarahscountry.com. I'd like all your ideas on stories for the new year when we're back mid-January. I'm absolutely loving you getting in touch with me, and there's some fantastic stories and ideas coming through just as much. All of the interviews you have heard or may have missed out on are available on podcast, and what an awesome opportunity to catch up on Sarah's Country podcast when you're on some of those road trips over your summer break. Head back through sarahscountry.com. You can also get all of the information. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us either live or on demand on podcast. And in the meantime, good night and go well.
This is Sarah's Country.